This is a Triple J podcast.
Hello, welcome back to Science with Dr. Karl. My name is Lucy Smith, and I got to tell you one of the texts we got during this week's episode from Maddie saying, imagine getting to afters and Dr. Karl is there with stories like this. Honestly, I would want to be around a glass table with that man. Some of the stories you're going to hear from his life during today's episode, so good. Today we took questions about lightning, about satellites, and why we can't take our own advice. The jury's still out on that one, but you're going to hear that and more in this week's episode. Let's get into it. You are listening to Mornings with me, Lucy Smith, and right now we are doing Science with Dr. Karl, as you've done for many years, Karl, answering people's science questions. Do you remember why you started doing this?
It was the idea of Angela Catterns saying, why don't you know a bit about physics, you've got a degree in physics and maths, and you've done engineering and you've done medicine. Do you want to do a Q&A show? And so at that time I was on alternate weeks with a dream interpreter, and then it just gradually moved into full-time. And then I started doing it on, it kept on going for years and years and years, and it was so popular that it ended up on Channel 7. I was doing Q&A there, and then I got fired and replaced by a palm reader and an astrologer.
What is going on?
Mate, I've been fired many times.
Yeah.
I don't mind. Nothing personal. It's just business.
Well, you've been doing it for decades, Karl, and present day, what keeps you coming back and answering people's questions on Triple J?
Oh, okay. The front cover of, yesterday I was reading it in bed, the front cover of Nature magazine has a crocodile. Now, you've got skin, 10% of your body weight, so if you're 60 kilograms, it's 10 kilograms, and the pattern of your skin and all the so-called skin appendages, like your ear and the shape of it and your eyebrows and all that sort of stuff, that's determined by your genes. How you're going to look, to a large degree, is dependent on what's written in your DNA. And the big surprise is that that's the case for every animal we know of, except the crocodile. The crocodile seems to have different layers. I'm still reading about it. It's got different layers of skin that are different stiffnesses and grow at different rates. And when they bump up against each other, they wrinkle and then they harden. But it turns out that the skin of the crocodile is due entirely to the environment it's in and what happens to it, following some sort of basic programming, but not the exact shape. That all happens on the day. I know.
So it's not impacted by genes, it's purely impacted by environment?
A little bit by genes, but mostly by the environment. And in fact, same with sex. Now, I'm very sure I'm not going to get into trouble. The way I remember it is that sex has 3 letters and DNA has 3 letters. So therefore, sex is your DNA, so you're either XX or XY. We won't even talk about Joan of Arc, who looked like a woman but was actually a man. We'll just forget that right now. We can talk about that later. Okay, so there's sex and then there's gender. And what was my train of thought there? I got diverted by stupid Joan of Arc.
Well, I was saying, what keeps you coming back to Triple J? And I think you've just told us, is it curiosity?
Curious about everything, and there's just too many things going on in the world. I can't handle them all at once.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Karl, every week people send in their science questions, take you on these tangents, 043975 7555, and we're going to do it. This episode right now, Declan in Geelong, You are kicking us off.
Hey guys, so my question is, how come we cannot see stars from space, but we can see it from Earth?
Can you see stars in the daytime? Probably not, because the background is too bright and the stars are really faint. However, there's about half a dozen stars that you can see in the daytime, but you've got to know exactly where to look. And so recently, there was a case where the moon, during the daytime, would go across Saturn. It would block Saturn, it would occlude Saturn. And you knew where to look, which was sort of like if you look at the moon and you go to 11 o'clock, then at a certain time in the day, there it would be. And I went out and looked and, oh my God, I could actually see Saturn in the daytime. So on the space station, if they go into one of the rooms that looks outside and then switch off their lights, then their eyes adjust and they can see the stars. Is that kind of what you're asking?
Okay, yeah, it is. I was just wondering, because all the videos you see on the ISS, you can't really see stars, but at night time you can, so I was just curious.
On the other hand, there's a whole bunch of people who believe the Earth is flat, and they look at the ISS footage, and every time there's a glitch in the footage coming live from space. They say, that's when they reset it to cover up the fact it's actually being done in a studio, and they've done very clever CGI to cover all the wires that make them look like they're floating. Okay.
Makes sense. Thank you, guys.
Makes sense. Thanks,
you.
Declan. We got Olivia and Artie coming to us from Wollongong. What's your question?
Hey, Dr. Karl. Hey, Lucy. Our question is why, when water boils, it seems to all boil at the same time, like all the molecules, but when ice freezes, it freezes from the outside to the centre.
This is a case where you can do an interesting experiment with your eyes and your ears. So you put a pot of water on the stove and you crank it up. I'm heading for getting an induction stove soon because apparently they're brilliant. And then you look at it. And what you'll see is that a bubble forms just where the bottom of the pot is and will rise maybe a centimetre. So this is after a few minutes, and then it'll collapse as it goes into the colder water, and you'll hear a very faint noise. And then gradually, as the water heats up overall on average, the bubbles will rise higher, and there'll be more of them, and the noise will get louder and louder. And if you listen carefully to the noise and think about what you're listening to, you'll realise that the noise is a harsh sound, and what you're listening to is little bubbles collapsing suddenly. And then as the bubbles get more closer to the surface, you'll hear the character of the sound change. It'll suddenly go into a soft sound because they're no longer collapsing inside water, they're collapsing into the open atmosphere. So the water doesn't boil all at once if you look at it carefully, and you can tell by listening with your ears. So it's a bit of an illusion. But on the other hand, how many times do you watch water boil?
Well, if you really want some noodles, sometimes you will. Olivia, Artie, does that help?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank
you, Dr. Olivia.
Tom in Adelaide. Tom, you got someone in your life with a baby. What's your question?
Hello, doctors. Yeah, my cousin has a baby and has noticed a couple of times after eating some spicy food, the next day the baby's really fussy when feeding. And so my question is, does spicy food affect the breast milk for the baby?
Sure, we've known about this for thousands of years in anecdotal evidence, that if the baby is brought up in a country, for example, where they have lots of spicy food, then the baby, when it grows up into an adult and moves to a country where there isn't spicy food, finds the food bland, really wants to get some spices. And in fact, this happens not just after the baby is born via the breast milk, but before. So you've got the baby floating in its own little space capsule, the uterus, but it's being fed from the mother via the umbilical cord, and some of the spice molecules from the food, especially capsaicin, will make it across the baby. So the baby already comes preferring that spicy food. And then it happens through the breast milk. Some of the chemicals will come through. And the experiments have been done in various countries around the world where they've tried different foods, not just spicy foods. And yes, whatever the mother likes to eat, the baby goes along with. But you say,
fantastic.
Yeah, but sometimes they do get a bit fussy. Babies are just like that, random. Like I remember on one occasion with Adam Spencer, who used to be here on Triple J, he read a book about bringing up babies, and amazingly, baby number one just slipped through the night, and then baby number two wouldn't, and he rang me up in a panic saying, "What's wrong?" Mate, the babies they do whatever they want.
Good to know. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you.
All right, we've got Alex in Bendigo here. Now, Alex, you're going to get a bit meta with this one. What's your question?
Okay, so my question is time real, or is it an illusion caused by the motion of matter through space?
Ooh.
Okay, I've got a joke for you.
Okay.
So Einstein's having an argument with his wife, and he realises, being sensible, that his wife is right and he's wrong. And he says, "Look, honey, I'm wrong. What can I do to fix things?" And she says, "Two things, time and space." And he says, "Okay, that's the first thing. What's the second thing?" Now,
Karl, you said that one last week.
Yeah, I know. So the point is that on one hand, we think that time is an inherent property of the universe that is married to space, as proved by Einstein in 1905 and Minkowski with Einstein in 1908, on one hand. But secondly, time, many physicists think that while that's correct, you've ignored the missing 8 dimensions of the universe, and apparently one of them is a time dimension. I can understand time that goes at 1 second per second, but what could the other time dimension possibly be? And we know, in inverted commas, that these other dimensions exist because of the mathematics of the Big Bang. We haven't proved they exist. We could be wrong. So that's a complicating factor there with regard to time. Then there's another whole bunch of physicists who said, yeah, Einstein is right, but that's just a small part of the picture. And time is, I'm going to use a fancy phrase, an emergent property of the universe. So by the universe existing, it creates the passing of time. And then other bunch of physicists say that time is simply change. So is time real? Probably. Yeah, ish. And by the way, our clocks are so accurate, we can measure time slowing down when we've got an atomic clock and we walk with it, and it slows down because we're moving faster than standing still. And we have an atomic clock, and we lift it 1 millimetre, and so it's in a weaker gravitational field. It's 1 millimetre further from the centre of the Earth, and it actually speeds up a little bit. So, but is time real? Probably, but, mate, you're heading into philosophy land.
Speeds up because of the different gravitational level at different altitudes. Affecting the atoms of the clock.
Yeah, we can actually measure that.
Wow. Alex, thanks for your question.
No worries.
Got us all thinking about it. We got Liz in Nam. Liz, what do you want to ask Karl?
Hi there. I recently read about a shift in the Earth's axis due to groundwater extraction, and I was wondering, how does that occur, and is it like another aspect of climate change we should be concerned about?
You're dead right. It has shifted, the spin of the Earth, the axis of the Earth. Is it due to climate change? Yes. Is it something we should be worried about? Yes and no. No, in the sense that it's not really going to affect anything, but yes, in the sense that we humans, and if you got all of the humans, they'd easily fit into a box 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre by 1 kilometre. We humans have managed to affect the spin dynamics of something 12,500 kilometres across.
Wow.
Okay, now we're talking about shifting matter. So have you ever seen them? Liz, have you ever seen them balance a bicycle wheel in a bike shop?
Oh, once maybe.
Yeah. So and they put a weight here and they put a weight there, and then finally, instead of wobbling, the thing's just running dead true. Okay, so that's what's happening with the Earth. So the Earth doesn't spin directly on the north-south axis dead true, but if you go to the north-south axis, it sweeps out an ellipse about 3 metres by 6 metres, and it does this on a cycle 433 days long. And we worked this out in the 1890s. That's how good we were back then. But the centre of the ellipse, well, there's two centres, but overall, the ellipse from 1890 till 2005 was gradually drifting towards the equator at 5 centimetres a year. And in 2005, suddenly, and it was a bit bumpy, so it wasn't dead smooth, but in 2005, it suddenly did two things. It chucked a lefty, so it was going parallel to the equator, and it accelerated to about 25 centimetres a year. And this is related to the amount of stuff that we're shifting. Okay, let's talk about that.
Wow.
So naturally, the Earth by itself shifts 20 billion tonnes of stuff every year, mostly sediment, in rivers. And if you go and look at a map of the ocean floor, you'll see that it's all bumpy except where the mouth of the river is. And if you've got a really big river, like some of the Asian rivers, it's just smooth for hundreds of kilometres. And that's sediment. So the nature shifts 20 billion tonnes a year. We shift more than that directly, about 30 billion tonnes in iron ore and all that sort of stuff, and coal. But by heating up the Earth, we're melting about 1 billion tonnes of, I forget the exact number, of ice every year, and it shifts. When ice, it's solid, and it goes to somewhere else, and so that we think that's the cause of the Earth being tilted off its axis slightly. But the cure for climate change is really easy. It's just 6 words: keep fossil carbon in the ground, because everything that fossil carbon does, energy and raw materials, we can do through biomaterials.
Oh, wow. And that ice melt and water would also accelerate like sediment movement as well. So just everything that we're doing.
It is. We are kind of messy, us humans. Unfortunately, I just realised the other day that out of the 40 nations on Earth that are destroying their native tree cover, there's only one developed nation in that top 40, and that nation is Australia, and we're doing it in Queensland. We're destroying our native forests faster than any other developed nation on Earth, which is very naughty.
Thanks,
Especially
Liz.
for animal conversation. But thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Liz.
Lovely talking to you.
Yeah, you too. We've got Dean in southern New South Wales. Dr. Dean, what do you want to know?
Hi there. There's been a lot of clear skies down here lately, and I noticed there's a lot of satellites that are going in all directions, north and south, west to east. How do they move against the rotation of the Earth and its gravity, and how do the satellites move?
Okay, here's a sentence that I stole from XKCD. Look up the cartoon, XKCD, deliberately chosen as a word that you cannot pronounce. If somebody can pronounce it, please pronounce it. And his name is Randall Munro. And he said this very clever thing, it's easy to get into orbit, it's hard to stay there. So something like a Virgin rocket can get up into orbit 100 kilometres and come down straight away, roughly where it took off from. But if you want to go into orbit around the Earth, you have to add 7 kilometres per second as you go around the Earth. And that doesn't matter whether you're going equatorial or going north-south. So this is how it works. When a satellite is in orbit, say 400 kilometres up, the gravity is not zero. It's 95% of what it is down at the ground. Not 100%, but it's pretty much. So how come they don't fall? Because they've got this horizontal velocity. They travel 7 kilometres in each second, and in that second, they fall 4.5 metres, but the Earth is a ball. So it curves 4.5 metres. So they're always falling, and they're always missing the ground. So the normal commercial satellites, to make them cheap, they launch them from near the equator. They get 0.5 kilometre per second of free velocity. That's about 1,000 kilometres an hour. And they go around the Earth east-west, following the rotation of the Earth. The north-south satellites, they don't get that advantage unless they launch them. Hang on, forget that. The north-south satellites, eventually they will see all of the Earth. They're the reconnaissance satellites. So the east-west satellites, they might go plus and minus 10, 20, 30, 40 degrees, but there are certain parts of the Earth, far north and far south, they don't see. So the ones that are going north-south, generally they're reconnaissance satellites to keep an eye on things. Does that kind of answer your question? You got to follow up on that?
So does that mean we'll never see the space station go north to south?
True.
Orbit?
That's correct. I think it varies by plus and minus 30 degrees going north and south, and they have a plan to bring it down, which I'm very sad about. I think they should shove it into a higher orbit, but that would require a lot of energy, but also put them in a higher radiation band so that the astronauts who would stay there would get more cancers than they would already be getting because they've been living in higher radiation.
Wonderful. Excellent. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dean. We got Jaden from Victoria. Dr. Jaden.
Dr. Jaden?
It's a big question.
Yeah, it is a big question. G'day, guys. Why can't we take our own advice?
Whoa. Normally I find it easier to take my own advice because I haven't got any resentment against the person giving it to me. So can you give me an example that happens with you?
Well, just asking stuff at work. Relationship advice, for example.
Right.
Like everyone asks for relationship advice. Why couldn't you take your own relationship advice or break up or something like that?
I'm not a psychologist, so I'm out of my range of knowledge, but I've read a few articles, but not enough. You really need a psychologist to answer it who could go on for hours. Maybe we should get a psychologist on for that sort of stuff. But the trouble is there that you're too close and you're not seeing it. So when you're automatically interrupting the other person every time they come up with 5 words, you don't notice what you're doing. So you're blocking your view of reality, whereas an outsider can say, did you know that you're interrupting that person? You say, I had no idea. So that's part of it. That's too deep. You got any thoughts on that, Dr. Lucy?
Well, I guess it is, to, echo Jaden's sentiment, often someone once said to me, when you have like negative self-talk, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
imagine the way that you speak about yourself if you were to say that to a friend, or, if a friend is coming to me and saying that they've got a problem at work or whatever, I might give them certain advice, but then not taking that advice on yourself. Why don't we accept our own standard that we'll give to other people, but maybe diminish it for ourselves? Is that what you're getting at, Jaden?
Yeah, sort of thing. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
just, I don't know. We just always find I just can't take my own advice. I need someone else to tell me what I already have in my head to then go ahead and do that.
Well, you've done a very good thing, which is to recognise it. And most people do, that's the first stage. And so, for example, in sports training, you might say, okay, I'll get a swimming coach, a tennis coach, or somebody to help me pump iron and go to the gym. But you've gone through the first stage. Mate, I don't know. That's a hard one. The brain is really hard, mate.
Maybe we do need to get a psychologist.
Yeah, there could be grounds for that.
Yeah. Thanks, Jaden.
Thank you, Dr.
No worries,
Jaden.
thank you.
We got Laura in Dubbo here. Now, Laura, you're a nurse, you're a med student. What's your question?
Yeah, hi, Dr. Karl. Lots of respect for you. I'd just like to know whether the influences on blood pressure and heart rate from the HPA axis hormones, as well as the electrical signals from the medulla, occur equally or how they work together.
You might need to put that question in layman's terms for us, Dr. Karl.
HPA, hypothalamic axis, is that what you're talking about?
Yeah.
Right, okay. So you've got many parts of the brain. It weighs about 1.2 kilograms, and we're gradually learning what different parts do. But the fact that it does one thing, that doesn't mean it doesn't do other things. There's so much we don't know about the brain. And the short answer is medulla is short-term control of your blood pressure, and the hypothalamus axis and all the things that it controls, that's long-term. So with the medulla, that's got a thing in it called the cardio-acceleratory center. So that's for sympathetic. But it also does parasympathetic, the cardio inhibitory, and it also is involved in shutting down or opening up blood vessels like when you jump into cold water or into a sauna. And these are short-term things, happens in the short term. Or you stand up suddenly. And so you don't feel faint, you've got to pump blood up to your brain, then that's the medulla. The hypothalamus, on one hand, have you heard this phrase, Laura, the hypothalamus is the conductor of the endocrine or hormone orchestra?
Yeah.
Have you come across that? So there's a lot of truth in that. It's not 100% true, but it's pretty good. And so it does long-term stuff. So it'll release hormones like corticotropin-releasing hormone, related to the steroids and so forth. And it'll also do ADH, antidiuretic hormone, which controls longer term the amount of body water you have in your body, how hard your pump has to pump, how hard your heart has to pump, and so forth. And it tends to come in longer term things like chronic stress or temperature regulation or emotional responses. So medulla short term, hypothalamus long term. Does that kind of get you started a bit, Dr. Laura?
Yeah, that's quite good. So you start running from a bear or something and the adrenaline isn't what immediately spikes your heart rate?
That'd be the sympathetic nervous system. So you come around a corner, there's a killer bear. So that's short term, that's your sympathetic nervous system, that's the medulla. So are you in training as a nurse?
I'm an enrolled nurse and nearly finished my undergrad med science.
And are you, what sort of nurse are you?
Just a casual acute care nurse.
Right. So I've got so much respect for nurses. One thing I love about them is that they're just simply so practical. I know it's a bit of a cliche, and I first came across this when we had some people around for dinner when I was squatting, and somebody spilled some tea, and the nurse immediately grabbed a towel, a whole towel, and just threw it on the floor. And I thought, geez, that works real good. Whereas I would have gone, let me get a bit of tissue paper and toilet paper. And she just went, thunk, I'm going to fix it now.
Straight away.
Yeah.
Laura, thank you for the work
Thank you,
that
Dr.
you do.
Laura. Thank you for your good work.
Tim in Canberra. Dr. Tim, what's your question?
G'day, doctors. My question is, if the the multi-universe theory is true, and there is no mass in a said universe and only energy in the form of photons, could you argue then that there's no time dimension in said universe, since photons don't experience time at all, since they go to the speed of light?
That is weird, that when a photon is emitted from the surface of the sun, we measure that it takes 8.5 minutes to get here, but as far as a photon is concerned, 0 time has elapsed. So I'm thinking we really need to get the clever people in physics here. But on one hand, in Einstein's general relativity, G for general, G for gravity, so it's actually a theory of gravity, the time and space, a part of space-time, and everything, they can be both influenced by mass, but without mass, there's no clocks because there's no particles to oscillate if you're trying to measure it, or there's no way to actually measure the passage of time, and in fact, we wouldn't exist to measure it. And then that then takes you down a philosophical hole. Geraint Lewis has written a book related to this called A Fortunate Universe. It's related to it. Then there's the quantum thing. And the quantum thing gets kind of messy, saying that even though there's no mass, the quantum fields can fluctuate, and as a result, you can have something coming from nothing. That is actually real. You can have something coming from nothing, providing when it appears that it exists for only a short time, then goes away again. And if it wasn't for that, your phone wouldn't work. So time could still be meaningful. And apart from that, you're getting into heavy physics. Are you a physicist or something?
No, I'm a cyber analyst, so I'm just interested.
A cyber analyst?
Yes. Yeah.
So what's your take on the new Chinese AI?
I'd be wary using it and wary of their claims as well. But yeah.
It seems to be able to produce similar results, but with much less energy usage. Interesting.
Yeah, maybe some logic going on there. I don't know.
It's so weird because it just shows you how so much of our life is built on belief, because when it was announced that it could work and on much less energy, suddenly the American tech stock market crashed of an order of $1 trillion. The world GDP is $100 trillion. And so all this belief in the system just collapsed. Anyway, moving right along.
We've got Curtis in Bermagui. Curtis, what's your question?
Hi, guys. My question is, I've heard that sand in the southern hemisphere travels north and vice versa with the northern hemisphere. I'm just wondering why that would be a thing.
It's not quite like that. So imagine that the sun is blasting from directly above at the equator. It's directly above you. And so the ground gets hot, the air gets hot, it rises, carrying the moisture with it. And then when it gets to around 20, 30,000 feet, it dumps the moisture as clouds, which is why you got lots of cloud cover at the equator. And it keeps on rising. And then some of it goes north, some of it goes south, and then begins to cool down, and it drops at around 20 degrees from the equator. So it drops to the ground north and south of the equator, 20 degrees, which is why you have the deserts of the world around 20 degrees from the equator. Not all of the deserts, but quite a few of them. And then you tie this in with the Coriolis effect, and you find...
What's the Coriolis effect?
The Coriolis effect is, on one hand, it supposedly explains why cyclones go clockwise on our side of the equator and anti-clockwise on the other side of the equator. It's actually conservation of angular momentum, but let's not go into that. Let's just leave that. But between about, say, 20 and 40 degrees from the equator, on both sides of the equator, the wind comes from, say, Perth across to Sydney. It goes from west to east. Now, let's just dive in a bit more. So look at Australia. What happens is it comes from Perth across to Sydney, and a branch of it then heads north around the border of Queensland and the Northern Territory, and then heads far enough towards the equator that then it chucks a U-ey and then heads the other way. So the wind, if you look at the sand dunes in Australia, just go onto Google Scholar and have a look at them, you'll find that they're parallel to the equator. The sand dunes are being pushed. They're running north-south between Sydney and Perth. Then further north, they're running at 9 degrees to that. And then further north, they're running the other way. So the sand will go from Perth to Sydney and then it heads north and it heads in the other direction as you get closer to the equator. So that simple statement that sand goes one way in one hemisphere and the other way in the other hemisphere is more complicated than that.
Yeah, right.
Great.
Okay? Yeah. So, in fact, when we did our biggest trip, we took off from Alice Springs. We went west for 1,000 kilometres, and we were running parallel to the sand dunes. And then we turned right and went north for 1,000 kilometres, and we were going over the sand dunes. And in that 1,000 kilometres, and during that time we didn't see another person, except one group of travellers. But apart from that, we saw nobody for a month. And
wow!
There was one sand dune every 2 kilometres. So every 2 kilometres, we had to go charging over a sand dune. So, but the first 1,000 kilometres was easy because we were running parallel to them. So the direction of the sand dunes changes depending on how far you are from the equator.
Did you have food for that month? Like all ready to go?
We had dried food. I had a fridge and a 140-litre fridge, and we filled it up with oranges and just put the fridge on freeze. And then we drank we worked it out, it was about 40 litres per day between the 5 of us, and we needed a couple of tons of water. So we look up the canning stock route. So we navigated our way from well to well, and we come across a well every 3 days. And sometimes the water was crystal clear, and sometimes it was muddy, and sometimes it had headless birds in it. Whatever it was, we drank it because we had to. We didn't have enough gas to boil the water, but the Australian Army had just come out with recommendations that if you added totally synthetic cordial, forget this natural stuff, totally synthetic, it would kill most of the bacteria. And even when there was a headless bird in it, we'd fill around the bird, add shirtloads of cordial, and we didn't get food poisoning.
Oh my God.
And Alice was, my little daughter, she was 12 weeks old at that time. We got her vaccinated and we took her into the deserts. So we were off-road for a month. And at one stage she began to get floppy on us. She got too hot. So we chucked her in a bucket of water and she came good.
You can do it all.
Yeah, it was 42 in a daytime and dropped to about 37 at night.
Oh my God.
It was a good trip, the Canning stock route. But that was after I'd done a fair bit of four-wheel driving, so it was our third trip. It certainly wasn't a shakedown trip, not the first one, no way.
You're used to it.
Yeah.
We've got Indigo here from Mienge in Brisbane. Indigo.
Dr. Indigo.
Got a question about noise-cancelling headphones.
G'day, doctors. Yeah, I'm just wondering how the noise cancelling works. So if there's a lot of noise outside and you've got your noise cancelling earphones in, I've heard that they emit like a counter wave, but does that just double up on the waves and does it injure your ears in the same way that regular loud noises do?
You're 100% correct with the first bit, and the second bit, we both share the same lack of knowledge, so let's just run through it. So on one hand, you can look at a sound wave as energy like a wave in the ocean. And it goes up and it goes down and it goes up and it goes down, and sometimes it goes up a lot. But unlike in the ocean, sometimes they can be really close together and really far apart. And these sound waves, they come in through your eardrum and are slightly amplified by the beautifully evolved shape of the eardrum, and they make your eardrum, of the ear canal, they come down the ear canal and they make your eardrum vibrate backwards and forwards. And what you do in noise-cancelling headphones, I remember testing some out when they just came out, they have a microphone and they listen to the noise coming into your ear and they make an upside-down copy of that wave. So when there's a hill, they make a valley. And when there's a valley, they make a hill. And if the hills are really close together, they make valleys that are really close together. So they make an exact upside-down copy, and they then broadcast it into your ear. And so they cancel out. So I remember I put them on. I was in Sydney. I put the headphones on, and suddenly everything went quiet. And then I took them off again, and I was in a quiet part of Sydney, and suddenly I could hear this noise, and it was the weirdest thing. And then there was not a lot of traffic. And then gradually the noise came back, and I suddenly realised that we're always bathed in this sort of 30 dB background noise level in the city, but you don't notice it in the same way you don't notice your socks or your undies once you put them on. And so, the first part is, yes, the noise-cancelling headphones work by making an upside-down copy of the way of the information of the sound waves, and then they cancel out. Second question, do they damage your eardrums? I don't know for sure, because I haven't read a paper on it, but I'm fairly confident, if there's an audio technician, please ring in. But I think what happens is that the way you get damage to your eardrum, if there's a pressure wave that moves your eardrum too much. And so if you've got a bunch of pressure waves, but the net result is that your eardrum doesn't move, then you're not causing damage, I think. What's your kind of thinking on that, Indigo?
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I still sometimes get like ringing in my ears at night if I've, been using my noise cancelling earphones. So I wondered if it was still doing a bit of damage. But that's really interesting.
Okay.
Thank you.
I think what's happening there is that unconsciously you're going through, firstly, if a little bit is good, then more is better. So if the music sounds good when it's quiet, it sounds better when it's louder. And then secondly, there's something going on called the Fletcher-Munson effect. Look it up in Wikipedia. Fletcher, Fletcher, I think, Munson, Munsen. And what that means is it's a kind of a U-shaped curve. It'll make sense when you look at it on Wikipedia, but it basically says that the louder the music, the more you can hear the tops, the high frequencies and the low frequencies. So I'm guessing, I could be wrong, that you might be turning up your music too loud. So it's nothing to do with the noise cancelling. It's to do with the fact you're running it too loud. If other people can hear your music while you're wearing your headphones, it's way too loud. And in Australia, industrial deafness, even though it's caused by domestic music, is the most common disability in Australia.
Wow.
I'm sorry, I'm being mean.
No, I definitely try and keep it not too loud, but maybe that is what it is.
It might be worthwhile seeing your GP to give you a referral to an audiologist, and they can measure your ears. And when I was a roadie for rock and roll bands, I damaged my hearing in one ear really badly. So try to avoid it. See an audiologist.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Andrew in Melbourne, what's your question?
G'day, Dr. Karl.
Dr. Andrew, welcome.
My daughter, how you going? My daughter Pippa was wondering why we don't have hair on our feet.
There's two reasons. The first one is a biological reason, evolutionary. And always remember that evolution isn't perfect, just good enough, but evolution has got rid of the hair on our feet so we can grip the ground better. Because it's kind of like a one-to-one relationship, whereas if there was hair in the way, the hair might move and you wouldn't grab the ground.
What about, some people have hair on the top of their feet, but
On the
why less on the top of your feet as well?
Ah, okay. I had to look this up. I remember, I've forgotten the name of it. I'm not being rude, but it's a protein called Dickkopf. Stop laughing.
How do you
This is
spell
serious.
that?
Dickkopf2. I came across it a while ago, and I thought, wow, what an odd name for a protein. That is related to the DNA, and so the DNA makes this protein, and that inhibits the growth of hair in those areas. And so when they've genetically modified mice, to not make this protein, they have hairy feet. So it gives you a better grip. Also, if you've got too much hair, it interferes with your thermoregulation, adjusting your temperature, not a strong thing. Parasites and bugs can live in there, maybe.
So you can pass that word on to your daughter, okay, Andrew?
Or if you want to be...
Thanks very much, Dr. Karl.
If you want to be...
That's a new one for the dictionary,
Okay, so
for the vocab.
Look, to be scientific, it's DKK2. Four characters, DKK2.
DKK2.
Yeah, or
Dick2.
Dickkopf2. I'm sorry. I apologise.
We got Nick in over here.
Dr. Nick.
Dr. Nick, what's your question?
Yeah, hi guys. Just a question relating to the brain and fatigue. I work shift, and if I have a couple of rough night shifts, I'll wake up the next morning and just feel hungry all day, no matter how much I sort of eat. And you can only stop eating because you know you should be full, not because you feel full. So I just wondered if there's anything going on there.
And what sort of shift work are you doing? You're driving or shifting stuff or making stuff?
Power system operator, so usually sitting at the desk looking at screens.
So you are one of the people who is essential for the running of the country.
I don't like to oversell it too much,
Yeah.
Dr. Karl, but
if it wasn't for people like you, but the trouble is that what they're doing is making you give up your life expectancy and your health. What should happen is that you should do a long run of night shifts rather than just 2 days of nights. So first thing, night shifts which is just oscillating and come at random, they're really bad. You should have a block of them so your body can shift into it, then a period at the beginning of the end when you can shift out of it. That's the first thing. The second thing is that this is a kind of philosophical thing. Your brain spends more time getting rid of stuff than it does analysing stuff. Your brain spends a lot of time ignoring stuff. So, Nick, can you stretch out your thumb, your hand at arm's length for me?
Yes.
Can you see your thumbnail?
I can.
Okay, that thumbnail, the size of your thumbnail on your brain, that's 90% of all the visual information that goes to your brain. So when you're looking at the world, all you're seeing in your brain, 90% of what you're seeing comes from that tiny little area, and everything else you ignore. And the trouble is that when you're tired, mate, you're not supposed to be like that, and everything goes out of kilter. In your case, and one day we'll find out the protein, and it might have a funny name like DKK4 or something, but in your case, it throws off your eating regulatory thing. So there's a chemical there called leptin. Leptin is given off by fat. Now, what's those, the Labrador dogs? They make too much leptin, or their leptin receptors don't work. I forget which one it is. There's a nice podcast about it on The Guardian. But if you give a Labrador food, it'll eat it. And if you give it some more, it'll eat it. And it doesn't matter whether it's full or not, it'll just keep on eating. So it's having a dysregulation of leptin. That might be happening to you or any one of 1,000 things. The point is that doing broken shift work is wrong, and you should get your union. I know it's hard to say, look, we want to do a block. But on the other hand, it might not fit your lifestyle because you've got to take the kids to school. It's complicated. And we do have a society where we need people to be awake after midnight. And you're paying the price. I used to pay the price when I used to do midnight to dawn shifts.
Yeah.
And as a taxi driver, I paid the price.
Well, so should tell the boys on the roster not to feel too bad when they have their third banh mi then.
Well, I don't know. It's a hard one because you really... it's tied in with society.
If you're hungry, you got to do it. And finally, one last question.
Yeah.
We've got Sebastian in Melbourne. Dr. Sebastian, what do you need?
Hey, doctors. I have a question about lightning in the ocean. So lightning's super powerful. My question is, when it hits the ocean, how far deep and how wide does it go? And how doesn't it just fry all the fish, or does it just fry all the fish in the area?
We've got only reports from popular newspapers in the tropical parts of the world where most of the 1.5 billion lightning bolts per year happen. And so the fisher folk, they see the lightning hit the ocean. They go over there in their boat, they find a circle of dead fish, maybe 5, 10, 15 metres across and maybe a couple of metres deep. That's the best we got. Something like that.
Right. So not that much?
No. If you got all of the energy from all the lightning bolts on Earth and shared it among all the humans, there'd be enough energy to make 2 or 3 cups of tea per day. That's all.
Oh.
Thanks, Sebastian.
It's not so scary. Thank you.
Not so scary. Thank you so much for your question. You can check out more of these via Science with Dr. Karl on the podcast, wherever you get them, Spotify, YouTube, the Triple J app, and, of course, Apple Podcasts as well. Karl, I'll catch you next week.
Peachy keen.
And that's it. Thanks so much for listening to this episode of Science with Dr. Karl. You can continue the conversation via Triple J's YouTube channel. We are uploading these episodes, so sling us your thoughts in the comments. Or, of course, you can listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and the Triple J app. I'm Lucy Smith. This episode was produced by Josh Brennan, and we'll catch you next week. Bye!
Dave Marchese here from the Triple J Hack team. Hey, if you love Dr. Karl's podcast like I do, you might enjoy the Hack podcast as well. Each day we bring you the news that matters to you, from the latest science on climate change to what's happening in politics and news around the world. The Hack podcast. It's your daily fix of the news you need to know. Get it wherever you're listening now.